Doug Pederson spoke bright and early at the owners' meeting in Orlando, and I'm going to speak bright and early and tell you exactly something he said that kind of bothers me a little bit. I'll tell you what it is in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Locked On Jaguars podcast, where it's your team every day. We always thank you for making us your first listen. We're free to subscribe to on our YouTube page. If you go over there and you want to watch me do the podcast, make sure when you get there, you hit the like button, the subscribe button, as well as the bell so you receive notifications each and every time we drop an episode. And then wherever you get your audio podcast, make sure you tap in at that location every single day so that you don't miss a chance to hear the Locked On Jaguars podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And shout out to the everydayers and thank you for joining me here every single day. You can be an everyday or two. All you got to do is just tap in every single day. All right. So Doug Pederson at the owners meeting, bright and early, had me up listening to his takes on the questions that were asked. A nice little Q&A session. It wasn't all volatile, wasn't crazy. It was mad respectful. And Doug didn't say anything wrong. I'm going to get that out of the way right now. Didn't say anything wrong. In fact, like most NFL coaches, these guys are trained in that media, man. And I'm telling you, I say it all the time. Coaches and GM, they can talk that talk up, right? And they can make whatever sound good. These are people that are used to motivating people every single day, all right, to do something that is very, very difficult to do. And I know some people think it's not, but it's a hard game when you're going out there smashing against these dudes. When you're banging up against, look, when you're playing football, okay, when you're out here, I work in a barbershop where dudes make you pause about everything you say. So I'm going to try to make this as cool as possible without having to. If you see me laughing, you'll probably know why. Playing football is hard. You get banged up, get a lot of injuries. And yeah. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go through the things that he said that I agreed with, the things that he said that makes me want to scratch my head. And then I'm going to tell you to remember every single thing that they say, because this time last year they were saying something else, and now they're saying what we were thinking back then. All right, is versatility being overvalued? Because one of the things that Doug has always preached about is positional versatility and flexibility. All that's fine. I love me a good Swiss Army knife. I love a nice tool in my bag that can do a whole bunch of things. But when it's time to really, really knock some, you know what, down, I don't need that little tool. I just need a sledgehammer. I just need a shovel. So sometimes is it being overplayed and overvalued when they're doing their team building? We'll talk about that. And then what's the bottom line? The bottom line is all of this is just a bunch of talk. Trent doesn't go backwards when he talks about what did and what didn't transpire, but we will. So the bottom line will be, can you undo or fix the things that you've done in the past? So my Q&A to Doug, I wasn't there, and I had some reasons I couldn't obviously travel. But if I could have, I think my question would have been, why the 180? Was it just results based? Because a lot of talk is about culture. He mentioned that when he talked about, I think he was talking about the guys that they brought in, specifically Eric Armstead. And they talked about the type of guys they want to bring in and the things that they want to inject into their program and into the organization. So before anybody sits out and says, Wiggy just being negative, I'm not. Pay attention. Listen. If you have to go out and inject, you have to go get something else to inject culture into your team, that kind of means you don't have it. I would much rather them have a culture and then go find like-minded players and bring them in to further advance the thought of whatever that culture is. Looking for outside sources to help you with your culture is a mistake. And I remember when they had Doug Pederson's old quarterback here, you paid him a bunch of money, Nick Foles, and he had the nerve to stand up and talking about culture. He was right. He was right. It was just coming from the wrong person because he wasn't any good either. And he was getting paid all that money, right? But he was dead right. And then Doug Marrone, the head coach at the time, seemed to disagree with it after a while. It just really showed you the divide of the team back then, right? So people can say stuff, but it has to come from the right places, and then it has to also mean something in the long haul. Does it change because you talk about it? Like, for instance, where's the question of physicality? Because that's what I would have brought up. They talked about not being big, strong, and physical enough, but then the only thing you heard today was more of about how the guys are going to fit, what the culture is, how you heard some more stuff about, and he caught himself because the one thing Doug did is he said, the line you saw in week 18 is the one that we envisioned from the beginning. And that's impossible because they didn't get Ezra Cleveland until the trade deadline. So that couldn't have been what you envisioned. It couldn't have been. And he caught himself. He said, well, and he changed it up a little bit, but that's my point. The point is how come they didn't recognize that? How come they didn't realize they weren't good enough from the very beginning? That also tells you something else. We have wondered what they thought about Walker Little, and I talked about this like a week or a week and a half ago. You notice they never envisioned Walker Little being their left guard. They never did, because if they did, they would have said that. That's not what happened. They have a chance to do that again right now. They said that he can play tackle and guard. Okay, so they drafted a tackle. They continue to pay another tackle $17, $18 million a year in what is Walker Little's last season. And now they've repaid another guard and kept an older guard. They just don't see him the way everybody thought they did. And that's fine, but that's not what they said before. So understand that these things sound good and these press conferences sound good, but really, sometimes they're just, like I said, it's that cat chasing the tail. It's just over and over again, the same things being regurgitated over and over again. I just wonder when, and it's probably too late to go back and start redoing it now because everyone they're looking forward and they're looking ahead. But when the coach goes back and he starts talking about these things, and then you hear these same things all over again. You hear about positional versatility. You hear about guys being able to do different things. He talked today about how they're going to be in nickel. Now the number's gone from 62% to over 65%. Now it's 75% nickel that they're going to be in, which means they have 4 down linemen. Well, you know what? Doug didn't really care for even fronts last year. What changed? Did the result change, or are we expecting people to be adjusting and learning on the fly when it comes to what is good for this team? So if that's the case, yeah, you need a bunch of moving parts and you need a bunch of versatility, because every 3 or 4 months we're going to figure out a way to change what it is we want to do. Or you got to know who you are, have a culture, go out, get the players that fit the culture and be able to ride with it. And I don't think they know. I think they're trying to find their culture from other players and other teams. I don't think they know how to create it on their own. They don't. Because I don't look for culture changers to come in the form of free agency. I look for culture changers to come from the building and the people in the building. But the people in the building seem to think that they have all the answers until they don't have them. And then they come out and say, well, we need to go get a culture change, and we need to. The point that I've been making this entire time is this: when are they going to lead from the front instead of leading from behind and being reactionary? It seems like this is all, well, we need to get it together real quick. All of us are going to get fired type things. And this is what we're going to say. And we're going to get this guy to do it. And he's going to help us. And the answer should come from within, not outside of the organization. Like, I'm not really upset about it, but it's just certain stuff that I hear. And I'm thinking like, well, that sounds good. The solution sounds good, but the problem was created by you. And at some point, Even though Trent doesn't like to look back, we got to start having a little bit of a bigger memory. So I'm gonna bust some myths down here real quick about that draft last year. All right, I'm gonna bust down some myths about the draft the Jaguars had last year. I did my research and I looked up on it. So we're gonna get into it and we're gonna jump into it. I'm gonna ask you: is versatility being overvalued? And I'll give you a couple of analogies that I use when talking about that. And then we'll hit the bottom line in segment 3. But next, we're going to talk about this versatility thing and something that they did in the draft that in last year's draft that kind of bothers me a little bit. We'll talk about it in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. Today's show is brought to you and sponsored by FanDuel. That's right. I don't know if you did it or not, but I was on pins and needles watching this tournament all weekend and seeing some of these upsets. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. I'm interested to see who people think that's going to be now. But make sure you go to FanDuel.com again /locked-on and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. All right, segment 2 here on Locked On Jaguars. Look, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all the shouting and screaming? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And you guys know what that means. That means you're an everydayer because it is your team every day here on Locked On Jaguars. And we are grateful that you join us. All right. We're going to get to versatility, and if versatility is being a little bit overvalued. That almost sounds like an oxymoron because versatility is absolutely something that is always considered a good thing. It means you can do more than one thing at one time, and at the drop of a dime, if I need you to go over here and handle that, you can handle that too. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that being versatile is a bad thing. I just think it's a weird flex to lead with, especially when you ain't figured out the basic things that you need to do. It's good to have people that can do a whole bunch of stuff, but I guess they call it being a jack of all trades and a master of nothing. Where are your guys that are going to be the guys up front? To hell with versatility. We need people that can just do what they're supposed to get done. I don't care if an offensive lineman is versatile or not. If you have injuries, you're going to have injuries. I just think somebody needs to be a good football player. And when somebody's a real good football player, they are, now watch this, they are inherently versatile. Because if you ask them to do, I'm not talking about return guy that can be a cornerback and a wide receiver. That is an outlier. That's Troy Brown. That's a little bit of Jamal Agnew. All of that stuff is cool to have that. But prioritizing and going out and getting guys just because they can do multiple things is fine as long as they're just a piece of the puzzle. And I think this was about Darnell Savage and where he can play. Yeah, he can play in the nickel. He can play safety. He can do this. He can do that. And Doug was asked whether or not Antonio Johnson was really going to be the one that was considered a replacement for Rayshon Jenkins. He said, yeah, probably. Yeah, Antonio does this and he does that. He's also versatile, can play big nickel, can play in the slot, can play this and play. And all that is fine. I'm not sitting here saying that it is a negative. I am not going to be negative Nancy when it comes to that. My point is, though, is how about just getting people that can first get people that can just do some very specific things. We talk a lot, and I say this a lot. Coaches don't care what you can't do. They worry about what you can, right? So what is somebody's best trait? If your best trait is versatility, that's not telling me much. That means that you can do a whole bunch of things. Okay. I want your best trait to be versatile. This is your best trait. That thing you do, that one thing that you do it well. And if I can use it, I'm going to take it and I'm going to use it. If I can't, I won't. Because I don't think the Jaguars have enough guys to just do what they're supposed to do and do it well. This is one of the reasons I keep telling people and I keep moving in this direction. While I like a four-man front with Trayvon Walker, I don't like moving him around and moving him inside. Remember, the thing that we complain about Trayvon is he doesn't do this one thing that everybody wants to do at the rate that they want him to do it. How did he get that way? Well, because he was so versatile at Georgia, they just moved him around all over the place, right? So this is how he got that way. So why do you want your team to be full of guys who do things that you don't appreciate because they don't do the one thing well enough for your liking? I'll give you an example. It was in the military. We had a bag, right? A rucksack. You had a rucksack and you had a duffel bag. They had two different things in there, right? So one of them had all of your tools for when you go to the field. We had an entrenching tool that was a shovel and a hammer at the same time. And then they gave us this, I call it a little Swiss Army knife, right? It was like 21 things you could do. You can open cans, you can cut something, you can carve something, you can poke holes into something, you can cork something. It's about as big as my hand, right? Very versatile tool. You needed it in your bag. But when I needed a wall knocked down, I didn't want that little thing. I had to go in there and get my sledgehammer. And some of y'all need to get your mind out of the gutter. I did not mean to say it that way, but there's some things that you can't do. And that little tool ain't gonna help you out. You need the big one. And that tool only does one thing. It knocks stuff down and it does it fast. So then you go, and I really need some of y'all to follow me because I feel you already. You're going somewhere else. I need you to stay here. We're talking about football. If I need to dig a hole real fast, I'm going to get that entrenching tool or that shovel, and it's going to get it done. Or we'll just call up to the front and go get a backhoe or something, then come dig the bunker. But it's something that is versatile is fine, but those things are meant to be used sometimes. You can't have them on Front Street being used all the time. And I think they have used versatile things. Doesn't it sound like last year, it seemed like at times they forced Jamal Agnew on you? They forced him down your throat. And sometimes he'd fumble the ball. And Jamal Agnew wasn't meant to be forced down your throat. Jamal Agnew was meant to, if he makes a play, he makes a play, but we're not going to game plan to force that down your throat. And I just think that that's the way this team has been. So when it comes to talking about some of these players that they just went out and got, the last thing I wanted to hear was when somebody said, well, what does he do well? Well, he does a little bit of everything. He gives us some versatility. No, just tell me the thing he does. Where are you going to play him? Oh, we have a specific idea for him without giving away the whole play, but we know exactly what he wants to do. He was targeted for a reason. We have a specific role for him, and there's something that he does. Now, him being versatile and being able to branch out from that is fine, but it sounds like to me the Jaguars are building their team with a lot of guys that have a lot of flex in them, and that flex isn't a flex at all, because if they have all of that flex, that means they're always flexing, and if they're always flexing, that means that there's always this give, right? I don't want a bunch of shock absorbers, or I don't want a whole bunch of guys that can make things comfortable. It's going to be a bumpy ride. I want people that just wreck stuff and do one or two things well, and then y'all got to get creative and figure it out. I don't think, no pun intended, and God bless Doug and all of those guys that do things every day that I can't do. But I don't think y'all so good that you need a whole bunch of whiz kids and wizards to fit into your system of versatility and flex. I think what you need to do is just find people that do what they do well and figure out a way to implement that on your team, and that they have one skill that is super, super high. It's like Derrick Henry. Well, he's not this. He's not an airback. I don't give a damn. Give Derrick Henry the ball and watch what he does. Just give it to him 25 times and watch what happens. And then that's what's happened his whole career. Who cares if he's flexible enough to do this and do that? It's almost as if like they're using the salary cap game and the roster building game as an excuse to just have guys that are good and solid at a whole bunch of stuff, but not real good or great at the things that they need to be. And that's why when you line them up against the rest of these really good teams and you say, give me their 5 or 10 best players, you got nice guys, you got solid guys, but you don't have those dogs in them. You don't have the dude that have discernible skill levels and things that they do, and you say that's what he is and that's who he is. Football ain't always about all of this other stuff. It's about just being able. This is a punch or get punched sport. That's what it is. So we're going to discuss that, and then I'm going to get to a trend that I see with this draft, because they don't go backwards. I'm going to show you where they messed up a couple of times, and I'm going to show you why the thinking is that they knew exactly what they were doing. That also is something that's a bit of a myth. And if they don't fix that, this is going to continue to be a problem. And that's why I'm listening with intent at all of the things that they're sitting here saying, man. And some of that stuff gets on my nerves. All right. So Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, man, we're going to discuss in the last segment something I want you to keep your eye on, the bottom line. Make sure you don't lose focus of the bottom line. I'll tell you what that is in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. All right, third, final segment here on Locked On Jaguars. I see my lawn man has arrived, so hopefully you don't hear all of that foolishness out there, but kudos to him for showing up to work on a Monday morning. He got paid already, so I'm glad he's going to cut my grass. But listen, let me cut some grass real quick. Let me talk about Trent Baalke. Just to recap, Doug Pederson has spoken, had a Q&A at the owners' meetings. I'm sure we'll hear from Trent Baalke at some point. Doug talked a lot about versatility, said a lot of positive, good things, and that gives you an idea of what their mindset is of them going forward. And, you know, you could have got anybody to sat there and say that, but because I think we all know what the problems are and what the problems were. Not a lot on the biggest issue, which was the lack of physicality that the season-ending pressures for him and Trent Baalke that was talked about a lot. I just think people feel like somehow that was addressed by getting a bigger receiver in Gabe Davis than Calvin Ridley, bringing back your entire offensive line, getting Cooper Hodges back from injury, adding Eric Armstead, who, while he has a degree of physicality to him, he's an older player, and that's not really, I don't think, what they were talking about. So they have they really addressed that yet? Have they really addressed it? He also answered questions about wide receivers. Said, yeah, well, look, it doesn't sound like either he's throwing a curveball. It doesn't sound like wide receiver is really on the docket in the first round for them. So we'll have to see that as well. But it's been a little bit of an interesting offseason when you think of what they said they thought the problem was and what they've actually done. So what I did was I wanted to bust a couple of myths. And the myth is that they let Anton Harrison go. I mean, they let Jawan Taylor go last year because it was too much money, and they knew that they were going to get Anton Harrison. The year before, they overpaid for Christian Kirk. It worked out, but they overpaid for Christian Kirk. We all know it. They did. All right? He never had 1,000 yards, and they gave him $72 million over 4 years. Whereas they had an offensive lineman for $4 million more, $1 million more per year on an annual, and I think it was 4 years, $72 million. But $2 million more on annual percentage. They did not re-sign Jawan Taylor. Why am I bringing it up? Because if you draft Anton Harrison, you re-sign Jawan Taylor, you move Harrison over to his natural left tackle spot. You're not paying Cam Robinson all that money this year, especially. Doug said he missed 10 games last year. Say it for what it is. He missed 6 due to injury. He missed 4 because he got suspended. All right. So if you're going to overspend a little bit, I think it should be on a 24, 25-year-old offensive line, because there are people that think now that the Jaguars ought to go offensive line at least 2 times in the first 3 rounds of this draft, and they'll have 3 20-somethings on their line moving forward. They could have done that last year, and that's my point. Instead of drafting Brenton Strange, maybe move up a little bit and get Osiris Torrance. Get Anton Harrison, Osiris Torrance last year, and you're fine. Nobody's thinking about it, right? That Trent couldn't get off of all of those late round picks and he was trying to move up. Could very well be true. That's another myth a little bit because of the way it's been framed. Do you know that he traded down from 24 to 27 to get those 3 extra picks? The ones he said he didn't want, But now all of a sudden, since Antonio Johnson panned out, since that maybe they'll find a way to figure out how to use Yasir Abdullah. Now it's like, well, look what they got. Look what they got. Look what they got. But remember, the talk was I tried to trade up. I tried to move up and I couldn't. You moved down in the first place in the first round. If Anton Harrison was your target, you go to 24. You don't risk somebody else coming up and getting your tackle. You take him. And last year they said, well, we don't move around just to get more and more picks. Doug Pederson said that when they got to 24, that they didn't want to go back too far, but there were 3 or 4 guys that they were real comfortable with taking. And Anton was one of them. So they moved back to get more picks. How can you move back to get more picks and then complain that you couldn't get off those picks, but say you got your guy in the first round? I just sometimes don't get it. And I know that there's probably a better explanation, but sometimes the way that these things are put out, I think people don't realize. It's like somebody doing something. I saw somebody at the light one day. They weren't moving. Then the light was green and people started blowing. And I got past them. I realized they were on their phone and they were picking their nose at the same time. But that's neither here nor there, because both of them you should be doing at a red light, because the bottom line is this, and this is the biggest part. If you got tinted windows, you can do what you want to do. But the flow of traffic depends on you to move. You act like we don't see you over there doing this stuff. To do it is one thing, but to act like we didn't see it is a whole nother thing. And then you want to shake my hand. No, you can't do that. When they start talking about what they did and what they didn't do, we ought to look back at them and say, we saw you. We were there. We know why you did these things. And now you're telling us you did them for another reason, because they worked or didn't work. It's just weird that we keep talking about culture that needs to be, it's the responsibility of the GM and the coach to establish the culture that you're bringing these players into. How many times did I say more organizations ruin players than players ruin organizations? Because if you're going out trying to add players to your locker room to affect your culture, then you're already losing, because you ought to be adding them to the culture that already matches up with what their goals are. I don't need y'all to come in here and change anything. I need to change myself. We're going to start with the man in the mirror. We need to fix who we are. We need to know who we are. So this whole thing about being versatile and this whole thing about having guys that are multiple and that can do multiple things, whatever happened to finding people that can just do the thing that you want them to do because you know what needs to be done and it is set in stone, and then that has a little bit of flex in it. It's all about what you lead with. They should be leading with good, not flexible. I think it's just a flaw from the beginning. And he said something, Doug said something very, very important. He said the messaging, he said sometimes, we got to start with how we deliver our message. Yeah, you mean like telling everybody your team was basically built last year and not doing anything? So now you turn that around. We can't fix that in one season with the same people that did that before. We need to be realistic. You are who you are, because if you said one thing and now you're saying something else, guess what? They ain't going to believe you. What they say, we don't believe you. We need more people. And to me, these things that sound so innocent end up being the underlying reason that these things are so problematic. You cannot explain to me and tell me anything that justifies them picking Brenton Strange, even if he turns out to be really good. You ain't that good of a damn scout. You ain't that good of a scout. Everybody and their brother raised their eyebrows when they picked that kid. And this ain't necessarily about him, but it's about the fact that they valued him and put him in a spot that he probably shouldn't have been valued in a spot that he shouldn't have been placed in. And then people started having their eyebrows raised up when he didn't fit and he didn't help them. They are going to go down swinging with their draft picks. And I don't blame them. That's what you should do. This is not about hedging your bets. Drafting people is about being right or wrong, and everybody's wrong and everybody's right sometimes, but it's about who's being the most right and who's being the most wrong. And the one thing that usually helps you is, what are you adding those players to? Not only are they good players, but do they fit what you're asking them? Is everybody a fit for the thing that you do? But before you can ask that question, the thing that you do has to be, you have to absolutely know what it is, and you have to be deliberate and intentional about it. So getting all of these flexible pieces, to me, is a sign of a bigger problem. And that is that who you are depends on what the weather looks like. You don't know who you are. You're grasping at it. Oh boy. I think when you're grasping at it, the best thing to do is just grab the best available player you can and build whatever it is around them in the draft. Young players, good players. If you don't figure it out, it's going to figure you out, and hopefully you ain't fired by the time it figures you out. I'm not trying to be negative, trying to be positive, but I'm also trying to be real. Make sure you check us out here on the Locked On Jaguars podcast every single day, where it's your team every day. We always thank you for making us your first listen. Until the next time, which will be tomorrow, tune back in. I'm Tony Wiggins. Thanks for joining me.